By the late 1970s, the Mexican gray wolf, called the lobo, were believed to be completely gone from the wild in the United States. Under the Endangered Species Act, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, together with the Mexican government, began efforts to save the lobo from extinction. A new era dawned for the Mexican wolf when 1 female and 4 males were captured alive in the Sierra Madre Mountains of Mexico, the last 5 lobos known to roam in the wild. The captive breeding program was then established, saving the lobo at the very last moment. For the first time in almost 30 years, the mountains were greeted by the howl of the wolf.
I am Wolf, a Mexican gray wolf. I am nature, I am balance. I am a keystone species that keeps nature's beauty in perfect harmony. I am the deer that can jump so high, and the elk that is strong and proud. I am the river and the forest. The mysterious and the magnificent. I speak for all wolves, as we have a deep and inherent communication with nature and all its inhabitants. At night our spirits sing, soaring with the winds above the mountains and the trees. When we sing, our songs can be heard across lakes and throughout forests. In the mountain meadows surrounded by granite guardians and green forests, we live as our ancestors have done for thousands of years. This is our home, our songs, and our land.
It's still the law to recover species teetering on the brink of extinction. And in this case, you've got the rarest and most critically endangered land mammal in North America, completely eradicated from the United States and reduced to a handful in Mexico that were live captured and pulled from the wild. You can't get closer to extinction, to forcing an animal off this planet, than reducing it to 1 female left on the landscape. And that's the story of Mexican wolves.
For many thousands of years, Mexican wolves roamed the Southwest, as well as, of course, adjoining Mexico. In the 19th century, Western settlers brought their cattle on the open range, and at the same time, our pioneering society was gunning down the animals that the wolves relied on. The buffalo, the elk, their populations crashed. The wolves lost their natural prey. So naturally the wolves preyed on the livestock. And what the livestock owners did is they organized for state-sponsored bounty. The last wild wolf was killed in southern Colorado near the border with New Mexico. When the Endangered Species Act became a law at the end of 1973, the Fish and Wildlife Service knew that they were very close to losing the Mexican wolf to extinction, which had been their long-standing goal. With this new law, They had new marching orders, which is to save this animal from extinction. And they sent down one of their experienced wolf trappers in the Sierra Madres of Mexico. Between 1977 and 1980, he was only able to capture 6 wolves. One of these animals died in his trap. Of the remaining 5 wolves, 4 of them were male, and only 1 of them was female. She was given the name Nina by her handlers. They did manage to get that female pregnant, and all of the Mexican wolves that we know of in the world today stem from that last female, plus 2 other pairs of wolves that had been captured separately and were later interbred with those last 3 wolves. Wolves have families just as human beings have families. There is alpha male and alpha female. They, of course, have pups. Oftentimes, the pups who have been around for a year and are halfway to adulthood will stick around with the family even as new pups are born. But as the family grows, eventually the younger wolves will set out on their own and try and find a mate and establish a family of their own.
One of the most significant problems facing this program has been the inability to release genetically valuable animals. That's a problem for Mexican wolves because of the limited gene pool and the need to get full representation of the lineages back into the wild to reduce the effects of genetic inbreeding. Without having resilient populations of sufficient size and genetic integrity, an isolated population of low numbers could be wiped out in a matter of years.
In March of 1998, 11 pioneers of the rarest and most unique species of grey wolf in the United States were released into the Blue Range Wolf Recovery Area in Arizona, beginning their historic journey, the journey to recovery.
We're gonna go and try and capture the female that's with the male in the Elkhorn pack right now. She needs a collar replacement.
She's still little. I like the color. That was easy to see. I'm gonna do a temp real quick. 104.4.
All right.
That's a good temperature. I'll put it up over your head, okay?
All right. Got it.
We bring them back. We have hands on them just to make sure that they're breathing okay, to show or to check and see if their temperature's stable.
104.4. One dart. She didn't get a full dose. A lot of head movement.
She's like 2.5.
Can you check it?
Yeah, you can just set it down. She's
See,
good.
Jeff, where was the dart?
It bounced off of her back.
I mean, every time we handle a different wolf, it's a unique experience.
Yeah.
They're all very different behaviorally, and you can tell, some of them apart
Okay.
just by their looks.
That's a pretty minor one. Looks pretty good.
We try to maintain active functioning radio collars on the 2 alphas at minimum within a given pack, but we do like to also collar yearlings and pups of the year so that we can document dispersal and new pack formations.
One of the drugs I gave her is reversible. Not a lot of wear at all. Mild tartar.
Currently, every wolf on the landscape is wild-born. Is a good sign of this ecosystem being able to sustain them.
Wrong, but then I'm like, we're going outside. Yeah.
Working with wolves has totally enriched my life. They have a place. All predators, not just wolves.
The main prey for Mexican wolves in this area is elk.
These wolves are really particular on what they take, you know. Every time I've been on a wolf kill, most of them I've found were old and teeth are worn down clear to the gums, you know. And I really investigate. I do a little necropsy on the animals. Wolves can, you know, pick and choose by testing animals. If they come across an animal that's lame or diseased, you know, they can smell it, they can see it.
Well, we just heard from the Arizona field team leader, Jeff Dolphin, and he's located the Blue Stem Pack. We might be able to go in and get a visual and possibly a count on the pack. Currently, we believe there's up to 10 animals. That includes alpha male and female, some yearlings, and then also pups of the year.
Now this pack of wolves being this far north is unusual. Or if they're actually pushing in and trying to take over this area, which is really weird because these guys, they've been in their old territory since about 2002. Look around here for tracks and see if we find anything right here.
So it appears that we're hearing 5 of the 7 radio-collared animals in this pack.
They're actually quite close.
There's some bald eagles here, so I wonder if there's something dead up here. There's elk tracks here. There's lots of wolf tracks here going both ways, up and down the road. Looks like it could be our wolves. There's possibly 5 pups.
You can see here the little traces of blood. Now it comes in a more sort of linear fashion, so there appears to be a nice blood trail, highly suggesting that they recently made a kill.
There it is. Maybe they were trying to get an elk. I think there's a dead animal just over here on the other side of this meadow right here. We're gonna go see if we can find it and what it is. So you see the broken branches through here? This animal, this was being chased through here.
What happened is they were down in here as we approached. They're moving away from us. Which is typically what happens when you're trying to get close to wolves.
Scavengers such as eagles, foxes, ravens, vultures and bears thrive on the remains of a wolf kill.
The riparian areas in the Southwest are absolutely critical. They're where upwards of 90% of wildlife can be found. The wolves play a critical role in regulating the animals that eat the vegetation. So when you have wolves removed from a system, their natural prey becomes much more abundant. The elk like to sit around in our rivers and defecating in the river and graze the vegetation down to almost nothing. When the wolves are present, they chase those ungulates and they keep them out of the rivers. And what that does is it allows the river vegetation to rebound and recover. It also is beneficial for the fish that need the vegetation to shade the river and keep the stream cool. That just has a cascading effect down the system for animals that require that vegetation.
Well, Mexican wolves are part of this wild landscape that we're in. They evolved in an arid area. They're smaller than other gray wolves. They're crucial to the balance of nature. They're part of the reason that the deer are so alert, that the bighorn sheep can leap so gracefully from cliff face to cliff face without falling to their deaths. So the wolves and other carnivorous animals culled the ones that weren't so fitted to their ecosystem and didn't allow them to pass on their genes. So we can credit the wolf with a lot of the beauty that we see in this area today.
This is the Mount Baldy Wilderness, and it's one of the most beautiful and spectacular landscapes anywhere. It's also very sacred to my two sons and I, as this is where we take our annual backpacking trip, and it's really as good as it gets in terms of fatherhood.
Well, that's a big wolf track. That's a very large one.
Well, it's not surprising we're finding so many bones and tracks in this area. We've got a side drainage off here to the east, and looks like another drainage just off to the west, so this is kind of a confluence of activity for critters moving across the landscape, from wolves to mountain lions and bears. And who could blame them, you know?
To us, they're brothers of four-legged. When we see the wolves in our eyes, it's like we see ourselves. As a native Pueblo, that's how I see myself as him. Because he is a part of me, you know, and he'll always be a part of me. You know, just to hear them howl to their spirits, or their way of praying when they howl, you know, or their way of greeting their own spirits out there, you know.
Mexican wolves are facing a very significant challenge in that they have very real genetic crisis.
All the Mexican wolves we have today came from a breeding founding population of only 7 animals. 7 animals. That's like within a wink of becoming extinct. So there was a line called the Ghost Ranch line that came from the last male wolf captured alive in the United States in 1959 in southern Arizona, paired with a female that was purchased by a tourist in Mexico and transported across the border in the saddlebag of a motorcycle in 1960. Some folks in Mexico had taken these pups from a wild den and sold them, and he bought one. So he gave it to the Arizona Sonora Desert Museum in Tucson. They had that male from 1959 in captivity. Those two bred, and that became what's called the Ghost Ranch line. There was another line of wolves that was known to exist in the Aragon Zoo in Mexico City. They were called the Aragon line. So in the mid-1990s, I asked a group of canine geneticists to evaluate the genetics of animals to determine their purity, and discovered that the Ghost Ranch and Aragon wolves were actually pure Mexican wolves. Based on that information, then we asked the captive breeders to start merging those lines. That was our first boost in solving this problem of a very limited base of genetic diversity.
To ensure a future for these wolves is to establish multiple populations on the landscape in sufficient enough of size to ensure that they can withstand environmental challenges like disease or high rates of illegal killing.
Animals like wolves, they require large areas for their populations, and we need large areas to support those. So one of the concepts that we talk about in restoring nature is the need for wildlife corridors. What we mean by corridors are broad swaths of suitable wildlife habitat that allow animals that require large areas to move between one large block of habitat to another. So the area behind me, for example, is thousands of acres. I would expect this area to support maybe 2 or 3 packs of wolves, and that's a very small start toward a ecologically and biologically viable population of wolves. In other words, a population that small would be very extremely susceptible to extinction at any given time.
The Species Survival Plan is a federal recovery plan, and it's binational. It involves a whole network of facilities like the Wolf Center and many zoos. It's established so we can create viable populations and safeguard any sort of genetic integrity in captivity for possible release into the wild.
Rebecca, what do you know about this wolf?
He was the one that was released with a pregnant female and then left her, which is unusual.
Why was he caught again after release?
Because he left the boundaries of the release area.
Okay. But he was born in captivity?
Yes. He was wild very briefly.
That's a good tail in.
I can come down.
That's right.
Watch your head down.
I need to get that other door.
All of the participants in the Species Survival Plan, so it's U.S. Fish and Wildlife, a lot of zoos, people like us, they get together every year when we're going to be looking at the stud book, all of the Mexican wolves in captivity, and also the genetics of the wolves in the wild. We're looking to breed animals with the lowest inbreeding coefficient. One of the unusual measures that the program takes is actually looks for the future to use some of the wolves long after they're gone, after they passed away, so they can still contribute to the recovery of their species. With the older female wolves, we'll actually spay them in order to save a species. We remove their ovaries, and then we put their ovaries on ice and we send them to St. Louis Zoo, where the reproductive specialist, Sherry Asa, she'll actually extract all viable oocytes or eggs from these ovaries, and they freeze them so they can be used for in vitro fertilization in the future.
When you're getting ready to do a reintroduction project, you don't want to release wolves that are habituated to people. So we built a couple pre-release facilities there are 2 that are managed by the Fish and Wildlife Service. The Ladder Ranch is one of them, which is where we are today. And we brought the animals in to kind of retain their wildness as best as possible by reducing the amount of human exposure they receive. Actually, a lot goes into getting an animal into the wild population, several years per animal.
We keep wolves that are slated for being released in the wild, or we also have some wolves that needed to be removed from the wild. The 2 wolves that are in this particular pen are named the Coronado pack. These 2 wolves show very typical behavior of a wolf that we consider behaviorally adequate for release. They will stay away from us as much as they can and either hide or try and run.
Ensure a future for these Mexican wolves cannot be achieved in captivity alone.
When reintroductions first began in 1998, we didn't know if they would be successful or not. So we looked at the captive breeding population and we took the most redundant or overrepresented animals from that population and released them to the wild, because it wouldn't be a loss to the captive breeding program if those animals didn't survive.
That's another little male. Nice collar. Yeah, he's got a nice.
To solve the problem of overrepresentation of the McBride lineage DNA,
No, not on the way
the
over
US
here.
Fish and Wildlife Service has begun cross-fostering pups in the wild. Young pups with different DNA lineage are removed from captive-born litters and relocated into a den in the wild with a litter of similar age. When the pups are grown, they will form new packs, mixing their DNA with the wild population. However, cross-fostering is a timely process. It is far more beneficial to release a genetically suitable breeding pair directly into the wild, and not all the pups survive.
The need for close monitoring of wolf behavior really isn't there as it was at the beginning of the program. A lot has been learned about how they establish territories and utilize the habitat. Our strong preference is to place greater emphasis on non-invasive monitoring techniques such as the use of motion sensor cameras, getting better at tracking using hair snares. So this is a great form of monitoring that can help guide wildlife management and help livestock producers take precautions to reduce conflicts between wolves and livestock. They can be particularly helpful for documenting, juvenile wolves or dispersing wolves or wolves that are not radio collared.
Well, it takes pictures if something moves this way.
All right, so this is more like a black bear than a Mexican wolf.
So a couple years back, my dad, Aaron, and I were out camping along the Black River, and out in this little field, we saw a juvenile Mexican gray wolf, and he was just out there really joyful and just running around the field, and just amazing to see.
Yeah.
A week or so later, and we found out that that wolf had been shot and killed, and
it was devastating, particularly for my kids. After having that personal connection with the wolves, it was a sense of loss. It was a loss for all of us.
We're here in the Apache National Forest on the New Mexico side of the line. It's the territory for the Fox Mountain Pack of Mexican gray wolves. These are two 3-year-old wolves, mated pair. Their yearling son, who was caught in a leg hold trap yesterday and outfitted with a radio collar and released, and their 4 pups from this year. And the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service first ordered the shooting of the mom, the alpha female of the Fox Mountain Pack. That was last week because she had killed 4 head of cattle over a period of several months. Most of what this pack is feeding on is elk. People realize that there's only, at last count, 58 of these animals in the wild in the whole world. And shooting a mother Mexican wolf is just insane for the loss of 4 cows whose owner has already been reimbursed for them. So we had a huge outcry. Hundreds, thousands of people perhaps called the Fish and Wildlife Service, called their members of Congress, and the next day the Fish and Wildlife Service rescinded the kill order, but unfortunately they said they're going to trap her and keep her in captivity the rest of her life. This is a likely trap set for the alpha female of the Fox Mountain pack. There's a little bit of elk, or so, there's a little bit of fur there. There's a scent. You can definitely smell a scent that most likely the trapper put on that little tuft of grass there. The wolf would put a paw down here and get caught. This is the difference between freedom and permanent captivity for an animal who deserves to stay out here. So here's this beautiful wild area that's owned by everybody in America, by all American citizens, and livestock are being allowed to graze on the national forest for a pittance, a subsidy that taxpayers are paying for, and yet we can't have wolves as part of the balance out here. It's insane. They want to present the image of wolf releases. The only thing they don't want to do is actually release wolves, but that's what they want on TV. That's what they want, the image of what they're doing, or running around with telemetry receivers. But that's, the heart and soul of what Fish and Wildlife Service is engaged in is removing wolves from the wild. I mean, the fundamental problem is a lack of people keeping an eye on their cows in wild country. That problem, if you don't solve that problem, then in a few months there'll be more depredations and they'll just scapegoat another wolf or wolves.
From up top of the mountains here, you can get a good overview of all of wolf country, the Paradise and Hawk's Nest Pack territories, down south to Blue Stem and Rim, and then over to the Maverick Pack territory. And in that pack territory this year, we have 3 current coexistence programs with ranchers that reduce conflicts between wolves and cattle particularly. Hawk's Nest Pack is one of the longest surviving packs in the history of the program, established in 1998 through reintroductions and survived up until fall of 2012 when the alpha male was shot. Hawk's Nest Pack had previously denned up over here in that cliff above the drainage in what is arguably one of the most beautiful places in western North America. So clearly wolves move up and down through this drainage, which illustrates why it's so important to have a range rider.
And we've been working with having a range rider for about 8 years. Honestly, it's been a good program for us. The range riding definitely helped. They check a lot of times where the wolf packs are. I think without the range riders here, it would be a lot different scenario as far as the wolves and the cattle intermixing. The man that works for me here, he's seen a wolf I think once in 8 years, and I've seen a wolf once in 8 years.
What we're looking at here is turbo fladry because it's reinforced with an electric wire. And the dangling flags, they flap in the wind combined with the electric pulse, are intended as a deterrent to keep wolves and bears and coyotes away from cattle. Wolves are reluctant to cross a line of these dangling flags. They've been remarkably successful in deterring wolf depredation as well as reducing losses to bear and coyotes and other predators.
So we're heading down to the Sevietta Wolf Management Facility on the Sevietta National Wildlife Refuge. It's around an hour and a half south of Albuquerque. We're going to capture a female wolf and do a quick physical exam, vaccinations, dewormer, and crate her and transport her to the Ladder Ranch Wolf Management Facility. We're shuffling wolves around a little bit to make room for some incoming animals. And this wolf we're handling today is an older wolf. She's over 10, and she was in the wild. We visit the facility as infrequently as possible, once or twice a week, to feed and check waters. We don't want them around humans very much. We want them to develop their own social behaviors and pack structures.
So my students and I have been coming here for about 5 or 6 years and have helped to prepare several wolves to be moved into the wild. So we'll be coming in here and helping the Fish and Wildlife move the one wolf into a crate so that it can be transported a couple hundred miles away from here.
Come on up, let's get in front of that tree, get right next to the fence. Guys, this is a gigantic gap right here. She's gonna go right through that bush.
I think for me as a teacher, the opportunity to connect students to real life experiences. This is the opportunity to see and do something that has real meaning. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service allowing volunteer high school students to participate in a program like this where they learn how to safely enter a facility, how to work side by side with professionals. And we have several of our students who've done this over the years who have now gone on to college and studied wildlife and are now working in the conservation field. So our tradition every time we come down to Sivajeda is to always read the essay Thinking Like a Mountain by Aldo Leopold. We reached the old wolf in time to watch a fierce green fire dying in her eyes. I realized then, and I have known ever since, that there was something new to me in those eyes, something known only to her and to the mountain.
The year 2000, the first group of wolves were reintroduced into the Gila Wilderness, just off the left flank and a little behind Lily Mountain. So we started by going to our facility at the Sievieta National Wildlife Refuge. We captured the wolves in their pens there and hauled them down here to the southern edge of the Gila Wilderness. We packed them up, rode about 16 miles into the middle of the wilderness. It's on the backs of mules, and put the wolves in a pen that was built on top of a hill. I was sitting in my camp that first night, watching the sun go down, and as it got almost dark, all of a sudden a howl erupted off the hillside right beside my camp. Guess the wolves were probably 50 yards away. As I was watching in the direction of the howl, I saw this, just in the last bit of light, a gray shape moving across the land out about 50 yards from my camp. I knew at that moment that the wolves had chewed their way out, and for the first time in probably 50 years, there were wild wolves again roaming in the Gila Wilderness. And it was a real special experience for me to be the person there to witness that. And we're preparing to take a group of eco-tourists on a trip into the Gila Wilderness. And we're here on the theme of wolves. Well, the way this trip works is that we hire packers who come in with a string of horses and mules, and they pack all of the heavy stuff. They set up a camp in a beautiful meadow right next to the middle fork of the Gila River. We camp there for 3 nights. We'll have meals together. We'll go out on day hikes to various places. We'll be talking about a lot of things on this trip that relate to wolves and the restoration of wild nature, to the importance of wild habitat. Our greatest hope is to either see a wolf, which is a pretty rare opportunity, but we might well hear wolves at night if we're quiet in our camp. What this trip represents is the early beginnings of ecotourism in this region based on the presence of the wolf. And the more wolves that we can put in this area, the better the opportunity would be for ecotourists. Wolves are an odd critter. People either love them or they hate them, but there's a whole lot more people that love them than don't. And they are interested in coming out now that we have wolves in the area to experience that.
You know, it's really exciting to be here at Paseo del Lobo. I'm hoping that we will hear the echoes of wild wolves on these mountains for years to come.
Oh, yesterday was quite nice. We had a hike through a beautiful meadow. We observed a small pup. You know, the energy level, you know, just elevated tenfold, and people were scrambling to get their cameras and binoculars out of their pack, and you know.
And we're gonna go for another little hike, and who knows, maybe we'll get lucky and see the Middle Fork wolves.
Yeah, I mean, there was another one there.
I just saw one a few minutes ago, so if you count that wolf as well as all the others, I think I'm up to 44. Some of the wolves I've seen more than once.
It's really up to us to educate and motivate the public to act on behalf of wolves and wild nature. The good work of hundreds of dedicated volunteers and activists across the country have preserved a future for Mexican wolves.
Just the fact that Mexican gray wolves are here just give another whole aspect of beauty and wildness to everything.
I've come to really love and embrace the exciting changes the wolf represents for the West.
Oh, I love the wolves. I want to see one behind me.
The wolf belongs out here. This is its home. We came into its home and exterminated it. And the wolf deserves to be here again. And it's our duty as the species that exterminated this animal to do that wrong right and bring it back here to the wild.
That's good, thank you.
And the experience of hearing a wolf howl in the night in the wild is, I just have a sense that the world is right, that the ecosystem is intact, that all is right, you know, with nature.